Team M, as in Mary, 13. Speaker 1 will be Caleb Suhy. Speaker 2 will be Iris Ann, or Jan. Con Team is F12. Speaker 1 is Katrina Brown. Speaker 2 is Darby Fitzsimmons. And the Con will be speaking first in the debate. Is that correct? Oh, excuse me. Pro will be speaking first in the debate. You have it? Yeah. Oh, let me read it. Okay. So we have Pro Team of M13. Speaker 1 is Caleb. Speaker 2 is Iris. Con Team is F, as in Frank, 12. Speaker 1 is Katrina. Speaker 2 is Darby. Do I have them sitting on the right side? I think I actually need to switch pictures. Before we officially begin with announcements, is Sanjay Carmel in the room. Sanjay, Dylan Jim Core. No? Okay. Proceed. All right. Welcome to the 2020 final round of public forum debate at the IHSFA State Debate Tournament. Our event began with 40 teams. We are now down to the final 2. Okay. Coincidentally, these are also the top 2 seeds in the tournament. So at prelims, when they go to the octagon round, these 2 teams were seeded first and second, and they lived up to their billing, and are now meeting in the final round as well. A couple of announcements for the audience members. Number 1, please silence your cell phones at this time. If you want to take pictures, there's no flash photography, please, to not distract the debaters as well. Okay. And now we have our 5 judges. So judges, if you'll please wait so the debaters know where you're sitting. Okay. So our 5 evaluators of this round are Tim Young from Chesterton High School, right there. Okay. Sierra Roberts from Southport. Dawn Troyer from Penn. Priya Sorohi from West Lafayette, and Ryan Aiken from Floyd Central. So all the names you see right in the row here. Okay. With that, then, good luck to both teams, and we may begin the round.
All right, before we start, I have a couple thank yous that I got out of the way. First of all, IRCH has been a fabulous partner throughout all of January. It's been an honor to be a partner. It's going to be amazing to see what you do with your life. Carmel debate, love all of you, specifically Sonia Chundy for giving me a debate. Leah Tan for helping me out with everything. Faith Austin, she has me thank her in the speech. I think we're going to keep it a shot. And everyone else, I love you all. I appreciate it. To my dad, I'm not even sure if he's here right now. I think he got 2 years left. I mean, thank you. Oh, he's back there. Never mind. I love you, Dad. Appreciate everything you do for me, driving me to debate, hockey, everything. I love it. Thank you. To Jill and John Court, Maurice and Chibi, I met you both this year. It's been an awesome experience. Love you both, and thank you for everything you do for Carmel debate. And to Darby and Katrina, good luck. It's been an awesome round. I love debating against you guys. And I'm just hoping we both have fun. It's been an awesome day, and let's get things going. So are all my judges ready? Let the time start now. We have heard Venezuela is a drug epidemic. Economic sanctions starve the Venezuelan economy of money, forcing the girls populace to turn to criminal activities. Subway is the people. Hakamiya 19 of the World Economic Forum writes, sanctions stymie economic growth, undermine production, and cause businesses to fail, resulting in higher unemployment. In practice, economic sanctions are a collective punishment. This is largely because of oil. Sanctions crop as much of Venezuela's oil revenue as they can. According to Investopedia, oil comprises 95% of Venezuela's export revenues and 25% of its gross domestic product. Today at 17, Reuters reports that multiple companies are closing doors or cutting off payrolls across Venezuela, which despite its oil wealth is suffering a deep recession, triple-digit inflation rates, and chronic shortages. Venezuela in the past 18 months alone has lost close to 1 million private sector jobs. Without a source of income, the people of Venezuela are forced to turn to a life of crime on the black markets just to feed their families. Victor 18 of the New York Times explains that every Venezuelan is an unwilling participant in the criminal economy. If Venezuelans want food and medicine, they must resort to black markets. Subpoint B is Maduro. The legal funds allow Maduro to finance his regime despite the intended purpose of sanctions. Since he has no option but to stay in power, these funds are the only thing keeping his regime afloat. Deal 19 of the New York Times explains that Maduro hangs on to power because in spite of Venezuela's economic implosion, they are still reaping in billions, and he is likely to find himself in prison in Venezuela or the United States if he walks away from power. The combination of Maduro's need for money and his people's need for food has drastically increased drug production. Craig S. Fowler, the admiral in charge of the U.S. Southern Command, told the Miami Herald in 2019 that there has been over a 50% increase in narco trafficking in and through Venezuela, with the majority of that growth coming in the last year alone, according to U.S. intelligence sources. The impacts of this are staggering. Wall Street 19 of CNN writes that cocaine trafficking from Venezuela to the United States is soaring, with the numbers of suspected flights from Venezuela that has risen from about 2 flights per week in 2017 to nearly daily in 2018. This trend is awful for the United States. Vessel 19 of PBS explains that 14,000 cocaine users died in the United States in 2017, an increase of more than a third when compared to 2016. Hardest hit the recent stimulant overdose death surge were Midwestern, Northeastern, and Southern states, according to the CDC. Nationwide, the rate of cocaine deaths rose in 15 states. Sanctions are increasing exports of a drug that has killed thousands of our own citizens. Contention 2 is a humanitarian crisis. U.S. sanctions block Venezuela from recovering from the humanitarian and economic crises, which prolongs the suffering of the Venezuelan people. They block recovery in 2 key ways. The first is to target Venezuela's oil. Weisberg 19 of the Center for Economic and Policy Research explains that sanctions have cut approximately $8.4 billion in revenue that was increasingly needed for essential imports such as medicine and food from PDVSA. According to Investopedia, oil comprises 95% of Venezuela's export revenues and 25% of its GDP. This reliance on oil has made recovery near impossible as they don't have the ability to fund programs needed for recovery. Weisberg goes on to explain that Venezuela should have been able to securitize some of the 300 billion barrels of oil in reserves. In the absence of sanctions, a government with these vast oil reserves would have been expected to have the ability to avoid this kind of economic crisis. The second and largest way they depend on recovery is by preventing Venezuela from restructuring its debt. Oxford University 18 explains that a conventional sovereign debt restructuring is not possible for Venezuela in light of the recent sanctions imposed in August of 2017 by the U.S. government. As currently drafted, sanctions prevent holders of Venezuelan bonds from participating in a debt restructuring. This is important. Weisberg 19 explains that a debt restructuring would be necessary to resolve Venezuela's payment crisis. Sanctions also prevent the government from pursuing an exchange rate-based stabilization program. The blockade of economic recovery has staggering implications. Weisberg in December concluded that when we look at the more than 40,000 excess deaths that just occurred from 2017 to 2018 through the crisis, the counterfactual possibility in the absence of sanctions is not just zero excess deaths, but actually a reduction in mortality rates and other improvements in health indicators. And conversely, the death toll going forward this year, if the sanctions remain in place, is almost certainly going to be vastly higher than anything we have seen previously. For these reasons, we are proud of the firm.
We'd like to run some prep before our first speech. Starting now. All right, that was time, 15 seconds, I think. So I'd like to start out with a few thank yous. So first, I'd like to thank my family, especially my mom and my dad, who've been so supportive. My mom for inspiring me to join debate and inspiring me to work so hard. And I'd like to thank my sister for putting up with me, not spending time with her. And moving on from that, I'd like to thank everyone on the debate team, specifically Lauren Mark and Josh Quimby, our coaches, and Connor Meyer and Tim Vincent, who also helped coach. And I'd like to thank the people at IU Debate Camp, Brian DeLong, and all the lab amazing. You all are so supportive, and you helped me with so many practice rounds and keeping me happy after tournaments that don't go so well and after tournaments that do go well. And last of all, I'd like to thank Darby. You've been an incredible partner for the last 3 years. I can't imagine doing this with anyone except for you. This is a culmination of 3 years of work, and I'm just really grateful to be here. And now, let's begin. Everyone ready? All judges ready? Let's begin. We negate resolve. The United States should end its economic sanctions against Venezuela. Our sole intention is replacing suffering with safety. Venezuela's authoritarian dictator Nicolas Maduro is barely hanging on to power. The economy is weakening, the public is angry, and the political military coalition backing Maduro is on its last legs. Maduro is already on the brink of collapse, and U.S. sanctions push him over the edge. Sanctions cut off Maduro's finances. The best chance for regime change is to block critical sources of hard cash from Maduro and his cronies with tough sanctions, reports 419. Director of the Future of Venezuela Initiative, Moise Brendan, explains that Maduro's regime buys the loyalty of military officials using government revenue. Sanctions choke off these earnings, weakening Maduro's grasp on power. Sanctions on Venezuela's state-run mining company cut off money from slugging gold, funds which have proven vital to maintaining military support for Maduro, reports the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project in 2019. In fact, Reuters reports gold reserves held by Venezuela's central bank fell by $1 billion in the first half of 2019. The U.S. State Department furthers that Maduro will be out of cash by the end of 2020. By maintaining sanctions, Maduro's strategy of paying the military grassroots loyalty is unsustainable, fueling mass defections and rebellion. There were 6 armed military revolts in 2019 involving senior members of the regime, reports economist Alejandro Arranza. 6,000 sergeants, a third of the National Guard defected in 2019, according to Jose Katrina, president of Venezuelans in exile. The military will turn. Because of this and the resource constraints caused by sanctions, the Latin American Risk Report projects there is an 80% chance Maduro falls before the end of 2020. The impact is economic revival. Economist Kenneth Morvov explains that Venezuela is suffering through the single worst economic collapse outside of war of the last 50 years. Removing Maduro will end this devastation in 3 ways. First, ending corruption. Maduro has engaged in rampant corruption since entering office. A UN Human Rights Report found that misallocation of resources, corruption, and underinvestment by the private sector, by the government, has resulted in the collapse of public services, access to electricity, water, and gas. Luis Suhy, former CEO of Venezuela's main oil company, estimates that $500 billion has been stolen from the oil companies, which account for 90% of government revenue. Due to revenue loss from oil, Maduro cut government spending, resulting in the scarcity of basic goods reaching 82% in 2016, reports pulling from data analysis. The oil industry didn't collapse on its own. Maduro pocketed $500 billion that would have otherwise gone towards funding government services, such as importing food. Maduro kills. He's increasingly relied on the national police he created in 2017 to carry out illegal raids and extrajudicial killings, resulting in 18,000 deaths concentrated in low-income areas that don't support him, according to Human Rights Watch. Maduro started the current economic and humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, and the only way it ends is removing him from office. Getting rid of U.S. sanctions now will leave us indefinitely with a corrupt dictator who pockets billions and murders thousands while his people starve. Second, humanitarian aid. Maduro has blocked $60 billion of emergency food and medicine from reaching Venezuela, reports the Washington Post in 2019. The U.S. has earmarked nearly $500 million in humanitarian aid to Venezuela, but there is no guarantee that people will see a single cent until he is out of office. Third, long-term economic growth. South American Trade Coalition or CURSOR has suspended Venezuela from participating until regime change occurs. Gaining access is critical. In July, the EU and CURSOR signed a free trade agreement. Thanks to this deal, CURSOR countries will see their exports increase by $40 billion, estimates researchers at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Only with regime change can Venezuela access these multi-billion-dollar economic benefits. Similarly, Moody Analytics explains that the return of foreign investment brought by regime change will enable a 9.2% increase in GDP by 2020, cutting the unemployment rate by 2/3. Only once Maduro is removed can suffering in Venezuela be alleviated. To bring back economic prosperity, we urge a conduct. with already 6,000 soldiers defected, coups in the future are going to succeed because they're going to have more support behind them.
Did you say 6,000 soldiers?
6,000 soldiers defected. Yeah. All right. Yeah, so did you say in constructive that 20 million jobs have been lost? What was that? What's behind that?
20 million jobs have been lost? No, we said that in the past 18 months, 1 million jobs were lost. That's what Sinead said in the reports. Okay, so...
No, so how much is the U.S. costing the oil sector right now, every year?
Specifically in Venezuela?
Yeah. You don't know how much?
How much are they costing? So, like specifically in Venezuela, like the loss of revenues?
Yeah.
I believe around 8 billion. Not sure, I don't know off the top of my head.
And when did oil production start declining?
Before sanctions, we also saw an exponential decrease in oil production. We saw decreases in oil production after
But
sanctions.
we can agree that oil production has been decreasing for years.
Yes, before sanctions, oil production did decrease.
So why were they decreasing then?
Are they decreasing now?
No, why were they decreasing before sanctions?
I'm not entirely positive.
Yes, for one, corruption.
Okay, so that question.
So is corruption going to continue if we lift sanctions?
Okay, so what we're saying is this: if we lift sanctions, Maduro has a history. So post-19 has already stated in multiple cases, Maduro has tried to implement economic recovery programs. If we lift sanctions, that restructuring will be able to occur. We'll also see programs such as a picnic.
Okay, but corruption will continue.
Corruption. I can't say for sure.
Okay, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I want to talk about the 8% card. Are you aware that before the 8% card, he said that there was a 7% chance that Maduro would be ousted in 2018 or 2019?
Yeah, so what you're seeing is that author specifically, the probability that Maduro would lose power was never above 50% until 2019. But now in 2020, it's reached 80%, and it is extremely likely that we will see Maduro out of office by the end of the year. At that point, we solved the economic crisis.
So why can we assume that because, so he was already wrong once with 7%, why can we assume that his probability should be taken seriously now?
So he was wrong.
Like he said there was a 70% chance, and we just saw like 2 weeks ago that Maduro prevented another.
Just because it's all probability. So the 70% chance wasn't correct last year, but it's more likely to be correct this year. The probability is higher, and we're giving you all this reasoning because so many officials are deserting, because Maduro is running out of money. He will be out of funds by the end of the year. That's why we're telling you that he won't be able to afford to pay the military, and he will lose power.
How many officials specifically have affected key officials to Maduro?
6,000 sergeants and 20,000 employees overall.
Can we see that question?
Yeah.
We'll run our rounds for you. Once I get the testing clear.
The 20,000 troops card?
Yeah. Start right now. Okay, stop right 8 seconds, or 9 seconds.
Can you take 20 minutes starting now? Stop it. Okay, oh wait, there's like no feedback, right? Okay, we're gonna try to speed it this way. So before I begin, just a couple quick thank yous. Okay, first and foremost to my mom for getting up at 5 a.m. to come judge for us when we never had judges and for always supporting me. And second to our coaches, Marie Suhy and Dylan Dentalcore. Without you, we literally wouldn't be here. The team was pretty much dead, our freshman and sophomore year, and only with your dedication that we were able to to do what we're doing now. And to the team, I think I'm supposed to give a bunch of you guys like direct thank yous. So, okay, Paul, Shiva, Bobby, Dave, Daniel, Shreden, Jade, Sage, Anushka, sorry, I'll make it fast. Katie, Marissa, Peggy, oh my gosh, there's so many people. Jasmine, Sanjana, Blahi, Vivian, other Sonia, and Leah, and to you too especially, for always like helping me with prep and pushing me to get better. Yeah. And then, let's see. So I guess to all the people I met on the circuit in these past 4 years, like Shreya, Malika, Ranger, Hamza, all of like the Westlaw teams, like thank you guys for being some of my best friends, and like I'm like really sad to see this end and like happen next week. So just thank you all for adding to the circuit. Thank you for everything you've given me. Like it really means a lot. And to Katrina, I love you guys so much. Like this is really, I already know some of your really good rounds, so thank you. Okay, so. With that being said, are all my codes ready? Okay, 4 minutes for the again. On their only contention about regime change, first, they're telling you their link is a decrease in income. However, remember what Caleb tells you in case, due to a decrease in funding because of sanctions, Maduro is not just giving up, he's not going to step out of power at the end of the year. Rather, he's turning to black market funds, he's turning to like narco trafficking and all these other things to give him the income he needs. So realize that with sanctions, we're only just worsening the problem. They can just try to solve the corruption, but at the end of the day, realize that they do just make it worse. Now, realize that while the Venezuelan economy is getting destroyed, the ruling class is actually doing just fine. The sanctions aren't doing anything to hurt them, because Moreno 19 tells you that as the economy has declined over the last few years, the upper class has already fortified their money in overseas bank accounts and markets, and he furthers that sanctions don't affect private sector cash flows. What this means is that only the upper class is secure in their money funds, while the lower class is feeling the impact of these sanctions. So at the end of the day, remember that the majority of Venezuelans rely on the government to eat and its delivery of subsidized food and goods. However, with sanctions in place, these are the people who are hurt by sanctions, while the upper class and all of these people with private cash flows are just not going to be hurt. We see no real solvency here. On their second thing about military defecting, first, make them like pick a number, right? They tell us 6,000 soldiers defect, they tell us like, oh no, there's like 20,000 total. Just make them like pick an impact and stick with it. Furthermore, a couple key responses, because Pattern 19 and BOA tells you that Venezuela's military leaders have become so entangled in illicit activities and human rights abuses in support of the Maduro government that neither sanctions nor the promise of amnesty will convince them to change sides. Furthermore, Cohen explains that police forces are scared of Maduro coming after them and their families in case they defect, significantly lowering the chance that sanctions are going to scare anyone into defecting. They're going to come up here and try to say, look, we've seen 6 revolts in the past year, but realize that what this should tell you is that these 6 revolts haven't worked. That means there's no solvency at the end of the day for this military defection win. So realize that they, in order to reach all of their impacts, they have to prove that Maduro actually steps out of power. Judge, this is really important. If they can't prove that, they can't reach any of their impacts. Now onto their Bosworth card that tells you there's an 80% chance he steps down. Caleb brings this up in Crossfire. Remember, they talk about it's just a game of probability. Exactly, right? They have to prove to you explicitly why, and furthermore, this evidence concedes that there's other signals that may lead to an increased chance of Maduro staying in power. They also don't really talk about the methodology in the study. We don't really know exactly why this is happening or if you can buy this card, seeing as they were wrong last year with a 70% chance. Now onto their impact specifically. First, they talk about how they're going to fix corruption. Remember, they have to quantify specifically how much of this are they solving for, right? If we suddenly ask Maduro from power, are we going to see a government that just has no corruption whatsoever? I'm going to get to that in a second, judges. That's going to be really important. They have to quantify how much of the impact are they solving for. Remember what I told you at the top of my rebuttal? We turn this because you just make it worse. The sanctions cause Maduro to turn into the black market. Now, remember they say that on humanitarian aid, and the second and third impacts on humanitarian aid and economic growth. A really important thing here is that this hinges on solvency. This hinges on the fact that Maduro will be removed from power, which they have to prove, and they'll be really hard pressed to do so. But at the end of the day, what you have to realize is that even if you buy their links about solvency, that Maduro will step down from power. This is really bad because Smith 19 of the Washington Post explains the existing structures in place in the government already mean that even if Maduro removed tomorrow, the system established by Chavez is going to continue to propagate these issues. And military units, and those who remain loyal to Maduro. So at the end of the day, ICG 19 tells you that rebel groups would actually perpetuate a conflict because some are loyal to Maduro and some are anti-Maduro, meaning the conflict will only worsen if Maduro is gone. So ultimately, turn their entire case and their impacts, because we realize that with Maduro gone, we're only going to see more problems, and insofar as the regime, the system itself is corrupt, we're going to continue to see all these impacts, even if there's another person in power. That's clear. We're going to run some All right, stop. Prep. First, I want to give some thank yous to, first and foremost, to my coaches, Miss Mark, who's been amazing, and also Josh Boomy and Tim Vincent and Connor Meyer, who all helped out immensely these past couple of years. I also want to thank the fellow Bloomington South debate team members, putting up with all of our, hey, hear me out on this one, especially Thaddeus, my fellow meat page admin, and also I want to thank all the competitors who've become our friends these past couple of years. Iris, Caleb, it's been a pleasure debating you guys. I want to give a special shout out to Westlaw, especially Roki. And moving on, I want to give a shout out to IU Debate Camp and Brian DeLong. They've really improved our overall debate skills. Couldn't have done it without them. Finally, thank you to my family for letting me bounce obscure economic arguments off of you in the car ride to school. You've been so supportive. I couldn't ask for more support from you guys. And finally, to my partner, the 11 p.m. Skype calls, bouncing arguments off of each other. It's been great. It's been a great ride. So thank you. All right. Are my judges ready? All right. Their first contention with drug trade will have 4 responses. First, huge overarching trend. This drug trade increase is because of corruption. CNN 2019 explains that today's accelerating drug trade is a symptom of rampant corruption among the Maduro government senior officials. It's Maduro's military officials which facilitate the drug trade, and this only gets worse in a co-world. This is because affirming needs appeasement, which makes the corruption worse. The Center for Strategic and International Studies finds that releasing sanctions will uniquely embolden the Maduro regime to continue stealing from government resources and abusing the rights of Venezuelan citizens. Peterson of International Studies quarterly empirically confirms this, finding in a 40-year study that targets become more emboldened when the U.S. backs down from sanctions. Appeasement didn't work the entire 20th century, and it won't work now. If you want to end the drug trade, you have to end corruption. Second, they named the decrease in the oil industry as a major reason for the increase in narco-trafficking, but the reason the oil industry has declined is Maduro. Oil revenues have been declining for almost 2 decades before the sanctions, reports America Quarterly 2019. Read The Guardian explains that this collapse is the result of the state being hollowed out by corruption. We explained in the case that Maduro's regime has stolen upwards of $500 billion from the oil companies, leaving the industry fatally underfunded. That's over $25 billion every single year just in the oil industry from corruption. They claim sanctions have only cost around $1 billion total. We far outweigh. If you care about the oil industry recovering and people turning away from drug trafficking, then the simplest way to do that is end corruption. Third, empirics disprove. Iona Petrescu of the University of Maryland quantifies that empirically imposing financial sanctions on a country decreases black markets by 10%. This is further evidence it's only corruption keeping the drug trade afloat and not sanctions. Fourth, this money isn't enough to keep Maduro afloat. Even with money from drug trade, the rate that his reserves are replenishing is well below the spending rate needed for the government to provide fuel for the military, which is why you're seeing these thousands of defections, right? Latin American risk analyst Bosworth. This is the methodology for why the Latin American risk report gives you an 80% chance he's out of office by the end of the year. Moving on to their second contention, which is about restructuring debt. Venezuela can't restructure its debt without access to international markets. But here's the thing. Venezuela was shut out of international markets before the 2017 sanctions. Phil Dunson and crisis group analysts explained that the government already couldn't borrow money because of their sky-high risk premiums due to the economic crisis caused by Maduro. The only way Venezuela gains access to international markets and can thus restructure their debt is if they oust Maduro, securing international support that would reduce their borrowing rates. And finally, on their impact, they cite evidence that sanctions killed 40,000 people, but Bahar of the Brookings Institute explains that this study's methodology is deeply flawed. The evidence ignores
that Venezuela's economic deterioration had been occurring for years before sanctions, and any deaths before or after sanctions are first and foremost caused by the continuation of Maduro's self-inflicted damage. The economy would not have recovered without sanctions because of Maduro's corruption. Now going back over all cases in Carmel, regime change does occur. The majority of the military isn't the upper class, and we're seeing the arrest effect by the tens of thousands. According to Venezuelans in exile, 20,000 individuals from the military in 2019 and 6,000 of Maduro's sergeants defected. That's a third of his National Guard staff. Defections increased over 200-fold from 2018 to 2019 because of this revenue decrease due to sanctions. We will see a coup for increasing the rate of defections by 200% every year. And any coup will have to back opposition leader Juan Guaido because he has international support. The little mini revolts that happened last year did back Guaido. Those didn't succeed because you weren't seeing the rate of defections that you're seeing it now, but with these tens of thousands of defections, you're going to see the coup succeed. In fact, history is actually on the con side. We've seen Latin American dictators forced out by democratic coups caused by sanctions before. In Guatemala, the military ousted their dictator because of the economic squeeze after the U.S. and its allies imposed sanctions. An interim president took over much like Juan Guaido, and the country's democratic institutions were restored. You can vote con on probability, you can vote con on empirics, you can vote con when you look at history. And once regime change occurs, we end corruption, human rights abuses, and see a 10% increase in GDP because Venezuela can now rejoin this multi-billion-dollar free trade agreement with the EU. And we'll see a 2/3 decrease in unemployment. We solve for the root of the crisis, thus mitigate.
Okay, so when you talk about how there's not enough funding to pay his military right now, right? Then we asked Katrina why these military roles happen, where she says oh, it's something. So what's how much will we have to pay them? How many people have to defect before we see your defects?
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? The reason they're defecting is because we're running out of money. So we only imposed the really damaging financial sanctions in late January 2019. The coup was right after that. That's why that coup didn't succeed. Right. However, we've seen 20,000 individuals defect because we were running out of money. Just last week, we reported that he's down to $800 million in liquidated cash. So that's why they're
right. What about the 5 other reports that also happened? Those
all late 2019.
Okay, yeah. So
that's why I get it. So is the main reason the drug trade has been increasing because of decreasing oil revenues?
So basically what we're seeing is that you're cutting off the funding, right, which basically in turn fuels corruption, and that manifests itself in the drug trade, like you say.
You do like a question? Yeah. So when you talk about how
there's there will be regime change or something like that, right? If we were to prove to you that regime change wouldn't happen, would you still be able to get your impacts?
Well, here's the issue. If regime change doesn't happen, you can't access any of your impacts. We tell you that the main reason for drug trafficking increasing is because of the corruption of the Maduro regime. And we also tell you can't restructure your debt because they only can restructure their debt before sanctions even occur. So if regime change doesn't happen, you don't access your impacts either.
Right. Well, I guess this is what's so what Kayla tells you in case is that it's not some sort of circular corruption to cause drug trade or vice versa, right? You're trying to say the drug trade happens because of corruption in the government, but what Kayla tells you in case is the reason drug trade happens is sure maybe there's an initial fundamental problem, right? But the thing is that people are getting pushed into this more and more. Dermot tells you that the daily Venezuelan citizen, everyday Venezuelan citizen is getting pushed into this because there's no funding.
What if they weren't corrupt and they wouldn't turn to the drug trade? We wouldn't have this summer in the first place. If Maduro's own corruption hadn't caused this economic crisis. If it weren't for Maduro's corruption hauling out the oil industry, we'd still see this booming oil revenue, and we would not have had to turn the drug trade over.
Right. So then if the problem here is that Maduro hauling out the oil industry, right? Chavez actually established a lot of those presidents that are causing what we see in the oil.
Yeah, Chavez did establish them, and then Maduro continued them. That's why we see Venezuela is stolen from the oil industry under both presidents from over the past 2 decades.
Yeah. So if we know that Maduro caused all these problems, how do we know that Maduro's successor won't do the same thing?
Because the most likely successor is Juan Guaido. He's backed by 60 countries. He's backed by 60 countries.
What's Guaido's approval rating in Venezuela?
It's 10%, but that's not the issue. The issue, Guaido's just going to be an interim president, right? So this is what we saw in Guatemala. They implemented an interim president. He wasn't democratically elected. He was democratically elected. He was the leader of the National Assembly, just not democratically elected by the whole country. And that's when he's going to decrease corruption. We've got 5 seconds left, so how was your day?
I may be
Pretty good. I'm tired.
She says now we start now. times in the rebuttal. It was on to extension from Iris' rebuttal. That just had the voters. So, all of each other. Let's start on 2 minutes. So let's start with the response to reverse contention. They have 4 responses to this. First, they tell you that the increase in drug trade is due to increased corruption. This is the main point of our contention. Sanctions cut off money from not only the people but from Maduro as well. This forces him to turn to things such as the drug trade to fund his regime. Not only this, they fail to interact with the link about the increase of unwilling participation in black markets from not only Maduro but the people as well. If they want to buy basic necessities such as food, they must turn to the black markets. Our impact still goes through on this point. On the response to our second contention, they have 2 responses to this. First, they tell you that Venezuela doesn't have access to the international markets, which is necessary for the debt restructuring. One key response to this, we tell you that sanctions are the reason that we're actually blocking the restructuring. They prevent members of Venezuela debt from restructuring. Therefore, if we lift sanctions, it will allow them to participate. Proposal 19 already told us that the debt restructuring has tried to happen. Maduro has already tried to implement the debt restructuring before. If we lift them, he has us that he will do it again. Second, they try to talk about this 40,000 death card and how it's not possible that they try to prevent it. What we're saying is this, we're not saying sanctions killed 40,000 people. We are saying the crisis killed 40,000 people, and that by lifting sanctions, we will allow Venezuela to recover from a crisis that has killed tens of thousands. Now, on the Iris' rebuttal, I want to extend one key card here, and that's a strapper card. This is critical for the round. She tells you that even if we buy the warrant about regime change, if that happens, this is bad. Not only is there systemic corruption, regime change only leads to more infighting. You can turn their entire case on this point alone. With more infighting, it just increases not only the crisis, but it increases the impacts of our case you're trying to solve for. Now, on the voters, the key voting issue today is people. Vote for 2 reasons. First, remember the very thing that is increasing the drug exports to the United States in the midst of an epidemic that has killed thousands of our own citizens. Remember the ballot card tells you that drug production in Venezuela has increased by over 50% in the last year due to Maduro's people's need for money. This culminates with CNN and PBS telling us that drug exports from Venezuela to the U.S. has skyrocketed during an epidemic that has killed thousands of our own citizens. The second reason you're voting for is because we remove a blockade to recovery. The clean extension of the Louisiana card tells us that prior to sanctions, Venezuela would have had the ability to recover. Proposal 19 affirms that Maduro has tried to recover, but sanctions have prevented his programs from working. Because of this, Louisiana tells us that if we don't lift sanctions, it will allow Venezuela to holistically recover. Health indicators will continue to worsen, and tens of thousands of people will continue to die. We have lives, which is why we're going to grow.
We're going to run fast. First, sanctions are increasing this corruption in the drug trade by cutting off Maduro's legal revenue and encouraging him to turn to the black market. Remember, the financial sanctions empirically increase black markets, increasing the drug trade. If we lift sanctions now, Maduro has absolutely no incentive to stop investing in the drug trade. He's going to be emboldened to increase his corruption. And now the second voting issue on overthrowing Maduro. The U.S. State Department forecasts that Maduro will be out of gold, being out of cash by the end of the year. They tell you the drug trade is funding Maduro, but it's not enough. False report 2019 tells you that Maduro is running out of money way faster than he's making it. That's even including the money he makes from the drug trade. And just last year, there were 6 capital coups and 20,000 soldiers, including the 1st the National Guard, deserted. The 200-fold increase in defections is why we uniquely see regime change now. Maduro cannot stay in power without the military. Lack of funding and mass defections are why the Latin American Risk Report tells you there's an 80% chance Maduro is out of office by the end of the year, and we're solving the crisis. Juan Guaido will take power when Maduro falls because he has international support from over 60 nations, and empirically, coups last year supported Guaido. No one else has the support Guaido has, so he is the most likely candidate to take power when Maduro falls. And this will lead to democracy. Remember, Cambridge University finds that since 1991, a majority of military coups have been followed by democratic elections. You can look to Guatemala, where sanctions were effective at overthrowing a dictator and bringing democracy. And at that point, Guaido is cracking down on corruption. He's solving the oil industry in the long term. The third voting issue is ending the humanitarian crisis on debt Remember that Maduro couldn't access international markets even before sanctions began. Debt restructuring would not have happened even if sanctions didn't exist at all. At that point, they lose all of their impacts on how the economy would have recovered, and 40,000 people would have died. And sanctions didn't cause the oil crisis. Revenues have declined for decades because Maduro stole 500 billion from the oil sector. We're the only side that solves the root of the crisis for decreasing sweetie gain.
Do you want us to come up for during Carlos or stay here?
Should we just like
You want us to
talk
sit
a
down
little
or
bit?
talk loud or like?
I mean, as long as all judges are
Yeah, I think
You guys ready? Yeah. All right, so you guys ready?
Yeah, we'll go ahead. All right.
Time starts now.
Okay, so just to clarify again, we talked about this in second cross. Like, how many people will he have to like stop being able to fund in order for him to get out of power? Like, will he lose? Like,
There's
does he lose
obviously no
everybody?
bright line, but at the point that he's already lost a third of his National Guard in just last year, and the rate of defection is only increasing.
Yeah, but then
At this same rate, he would be completely out of the National Guard would be completely gone within 2 years.
okay, so you're just saying we assume like there's like a linear like decrease in how many national.
No, we're saying that the rate is accelerating, so it'll actually be less than 2 years.
Okay.
The evidence we give you is that he'll be out of office by the end of this year.
Yeah. Okay, you can take a question.
Yeah, so the people involved in the drug trade, they're profiting from this, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what incentive do they, let's say we remove sanctions, what incentive do they have to divest from something that they're actively profiting from?
Yeah. So basically, what our impact is, we're preventing the worsening of this like push into the.
We're telling you that sanctions are increasing the drug trade. That's the evidence we give you empirically. Financial sanctions increase the black market.
They decreased the black market by 10%, that was a misspeak.
Wait.
Is this a
Financial
Venezuela
Investment Rescue of the
specifically?
University of Maryland, empirically sanctions decrease black market activity by 10%.
Yeah, is this
It's
Venezuela
promoting
specific?
corruption, which is increased. It's just sanctions overall, it's an empirical.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Do you have a question?
So I want to talk about this 80% curve. Can you explain the methodology behind how they got this 80% figure specifically?
Yes,
on
the
probability?
methodology is because we've seen such a high rate of defections and because Maduro is going to be out of cash by the end of the year.
If you
That
want like
is the
a
methodology.
more broad methodology of like the hexagon model itself, what they do is they take key factors in like situations being monitored and look at like the impact they'll have based on the environment. They look at trends to see how it'll sway over time. So that's the real methodology.
You guys take questions?
Yeah, you can see the evidence on that. Okay, so who is the most likely candidate to take office
Not
if Maduro
Guaido.
loses
Not
power?
Guaido.
Why not Guaido?
Because he has a 10% approval rating right now, and we have so Ward 19
It's
says.
actually 38%.
Yeah, it's 38%,
But
and every coup is
wait,
back to the
didn't
past.
you just tell me across that was 10% though?
Oh, that was, okay, well, regardless of his approval rating, it doesn't matter,
Okay,
because
so-
like, he's the only viable opposition leader.
Guaido's been supported by past coups, right?
But why don't approval ratings matter?
Because it's who's been supported by past coups, right? So here's your options. It's kind of binary in Venezuela right now. You either get Maduro or Guaido. The military's not dumb. They know that they're going to have to back Guaido if they want to see regime change, which is what enables them to get paid again.
So why-
The military's first and foremost priority is getting paid. That's why you're seeing 20,000
So why
defections
does the
from that
military
The vast
back Guaido?
majority of the military is
So
getting their
What are
salaries.
they're gonna have to back
military
Guaido because it's
Guaido?
either Maduro who doesn't pay them or Guaido who will pay them because like he's
They're not-
gonna decrease.
they're not-
Wait, so then why has everybody like defected right
They're
now?
not going to put in power another of Maduro's inner circle.
Because the rate of
to fix the situation.
the rate of defections is increasing, right? So like that's why because we just imposed financial sanctions because he's still running out of money, so he's been able to pay some of them and all.
Yeah, how much time do we have left?
15 seconds.
When the rest starting now?
Is everybody ready? Let's be maneuvers. 2 minutes to get it now. So first, on this, our second intention about how we block economic recovery, we try to tell you about people aren't going to want to invest or something like that. But remember that we literally, all we have to do when we lift sanctions is we give Venezuela the chance to fix the crisis. We give you 2 warrants for why this is so. We'll be able to securitize the oil, which arguably people do really want.
also evidence tells you, okay, there's an 80% chance, right? Even if you believe that, all of the impacts hinge on the fact that you suddenly have like this magical, completely non-corrupt, completely good ruler, right? When they say it's going to be Guaido, he's the only alternative. However, the problem here is that Guaido literally has a 10% approval rating, and Word 19 explains that 4 people are trying to take his place, that they are problems with this socialist model. And the socialist model is this underlying problem. They try to say this is the root cause. Remember, at the end of the day, the socialist model is the underlying problem. If you remove Maduro and replace him with another socialist leader, they have literally no impacts whatsoever, because at the end of the day, the socialist model is going to continue to see all these bad impacts that we're seeing right now. That if you helped on the pro side, however, if you institute these economic reforms, you're literally changing the model so that people will be able to solve for all the impacts that we're going to try to talk about. So I mean, remember, they try to say that, because like a lot of the empirics, they say like are generally there's like a 10% decrease. Remember that it's not specific to Venezuela. What we see in Venezuela right now is this drug epidemic, which is like our last word, right? So they're going to try to tell you, corruption is the underlying problem. 1, remember that's going to continue in their world. 2, this is unwilling participation. That's what people tells you in case. These are day-to-day citizens who are pushed into the black market because they have no funding because of sanctions. So at the end of the day, in order to prevent more people going to the black market, you have to go pro. Thank you.
Do we have any prep time left?
You have 17 seconds.
Starting prep now.
Judge Drake? All right. 2 main voting issues in today's debate. First, regime change. 4 reasons you can vote confidently. First, even including the drug trade, Maduro is burning through cash faster than he can replenish it. Just last week, Bloomberg quantified that he's only got $800 million left in cash. Maduro will be out of funds by the end of the year. Second, papers find empirically a majority of the time news leads to democracy. History is on our side. Third, we're already seeing the effects of Maduro's financial constraints. There were 220,000 defections last year, including a third of the military sergeants. That's a 200-fold increase in defections from 2018. Once Maduro's military turns, there's literally no world in which he stays in power. Fourth, these sanctions are widely relying on American risk report gives you an 80% chance Maduro falls by the end of 2020 on probability to vote con because they don't access any of their impacts without regime change either. The second voting issue is humanitarian crisis. First, on debt restructuring, they couldn't restructure their debt before sanctions because they couldn't access international markets with Maduro, so this goes unresponded to. Second, drug trafficking won't decrease without regime change. All revenues have been decreasing steadily since 1999. $500 billion has been stolen from the oil industry since 2000. That's over 10 times more than what's been lost by sanctions. And CNN explains the root of the issue is corruption. If you don't solve the corruption, the drug trade increases regardless because corrupt individuals have no incentive to stop doing something that's making them money. You can actually go con here. It's Maduro's corruption and mismanagement that is to blame for the current crisis, and the only way we solve is by kicking him and his regime out of office. Guaido is the most likely opposition, and he will crack down on corruption. He doesn't have to have a higher approval rating because he's just an interim president. If we end sanctions without kicking Maduro out, we are still left with a dictator who has driven his country into an economic crisis because of corruption and mismanagement. So even if you see a slight economic bump from removing sanctions, in the long run, you will just see Maduro drive the country into the ground again. In a calm world, the Venezuelans gain access to $500 billion worth of aid that's been blocked from entering the country by Maduro, and join a free trade agreement which will cause a 10% jump in economic growth, lifting millions out of poverty. On con, you can vote con on probability, you can vote con on history, you can vote con on empirics, and the only world that solves the humanitarian crisis in the